He looks past the headline and asks a smaller, harder question. What if worse only means the cone of uncertainty just widened? A late batch of positions nudged the curve and the fan-out grew. Not like a warning siren, but like a receipt. Prediction is a budget. Every hour missed, every photon lost to sky glow, turns tomorrow's estimate into a cost. The story is not doom. It is calibration, time, and the arithmetic of what has not yet been seen. Worse than thought becomes the price of new information. The arc is short, the target dim, the geometry unkind. One observatory adds a point, the line tilts. Another notes a faint brightening, rotation, shape, or a whisper of momentum from the surface. A non-gravitational tug may be present or only appears so when patient noise imitates intent. In this window, uncertainty is not failure. It is the correct answer to an under-constrained question. This film follows 5 testable hypotheses and the measurements that can separate them. It will show how small biases pretend to be physics, how silence still carries weight, and why tightening an orbit often costs more than finding it. The aim is plain. Define worse with numbers, methods, and consequences. Before the window closes again, the task is to decide what to measure next, how to measure it cleanly, and what it will take to make the cone finally shrink. He is not a threat in the dark so much as a faint smear crossing a busy star field. 3. I divided by Atlas earns its interstellar candidacy because track and speed refuse the neat boxes of local debris. The task begins with a moving point that changes brightness with phase and grants only a short positional arc from which anyone dares to predict a long future. 3 channels try to hold him. Ground optical surveys deliver positions and flux through nights of uneven seeing. Spaceborne infrared weighs heat rather than sunlight, hinting at size and surface. Radar would be decisive, but range, geometry, and transmitter power make it unlikely. Each channel adds a sliver. None alone is sovereign, and stitching them is half the science. Geometry is the quiet tyrant. At low solar elongation, he swims in twilight, sky glow, and zodiacal sheen. At high phase angle, rough facets glare and fade, turning a steady body into a flicker. A dark surface lowers the floor, forcing longer exposures while noise rises with it. The image exists barely if weather, optics, and angle agree for a few patient minutes. Cadence is the second tyrant. Surveys sweep by schedule, not by wish. A gap of a few nights becomes a gap in leverage. Clouds become algebra. With a short arc, each new datum carries outsized weight, and the fit chases it. Analysts watch not only mean residuals, but their time shape, because structure that repeats with our angle is the handwriting of systematics. Photometry tells a parallel story. A wobbling light curve may mean rotation, elongation, or patchy albedo. It may also mean the signal to noise is bargaining with the background. Centroids drift when faint stars leak into the point spread function. Reference catalogs differ by subtle milliarcseconds and color terms. A distortion here, a bias there, and physics appears on cue. The window opens and shuts like a lens cap. Season, ecliptic latitude, and moon phase conspire to shorten the nights that matter. A few degrees of sky can be unreachable for weeks, and when the object brightens, it may also be sinking. Observability is logistics as much as science. Who has time on which telescope, under which sky, before the geometry walks away? So production tracks a small set of stubborn quantities. Absolute magnitude is proxy for size, signal to noise for honesty, arc length for leverage, and astrometric uncertainty for humility. Data curation trims outliers by rule, not by mood. The reward is not drama, but clean scatter that a model can trust without being flattered into a story. In that light, worse simply means the scene is dimmer, the angle's harsher, and the price of clarity higher than the headline implies. The object has not grown teeth, the budget has grown line items, background, cadence, and geometry collect their tolls, and certainty, as ever, is purchased in nights, not adjectives. The ignition was ordinary in the logbook and unsettling in the plot. A late cadence of position slipped into the fit and bent the residuals not into noise, but into a curve with memory. The orbit cone thickened. Cross-checks followed stricter clipping, alternate catalogs, reweighting by seeing, and the shape would not leave. Worse gained a contour, error that preferred certain hours and angles instead of washing to white. Objectives sharpened along that bend. Separate scarcity from physics. Test whether a faint non-gravitational push exists or whether instruments are staging it. Put numbers, not adjectives, on catalog and optical biases. Read the light curve with discipline so brightness breadth does not masquerade as force and cost every remedy, because an answer that arrives after the window closes is only literature. Hypothesis 1 is the humble one. The arc is thin and skewed in time. A few nights carry too much authority. Clouds and moonlight have written themselves into the model. The test is procedural, not heroic. Extend the arc with geometry-aware nights, distribute hour angles, and ask if structured residuals relax. If they do, the problem was hunger, not mystery, and cadence is the cure. Hypothesis, two whispers from dynamics. A weak, non-gravitational term, perhaps thermal recoil or a trickle of volatiles, pushes gently enough to dodge easy photometry. The test is penalized, modeling fit with and without A terms, pay a price for complexity, and look for independent hints in infrared or correlated light curve phase. If the term survives knives and penalties, it earns attention. Hypothesis 3 measures the rulers rather than the sky. Distortion maps, color terms, and reference frames can tug centroids by milliarc seconds that grow into continents downstream. The test is public calibration. Cross-reduce identical frames through independent pipelines, swap catalogs, blind the origin, and see whether the bias travels with the tool. If it does, fix the tool before chasing physics. Hypothesis 4 lives in the flicker. Rotation, elongation, and patchy albedo make brightness breathe, and breathing shifts centroids when the signal bargains with the background. The test is photometry on rails, fixed apertures, vetted comparison stars, stable sky, annuli, and orbit fits that honor explicit rotation terms. If the orbit tightens under that discipline, shape was the culprit. Hypothesis 5 hides in the air and the field. Air mass, thin cirrus, zodiacal glow, crowded star patterns, and moon geometry all leave fingerprints that align with time rather than with celestial mechanics. The test is to treat weather and background as covariates. When residuals calm the moment the atmosphere is allowed to speak, one more ghost of new physics is dismissed. With claims declared, the mission becomes logistics. Map each hypothesis to a decisive, cheapest test, assign a measurable exit criterion, and publish the expected change in uncertainty. Indecision has a price equal to nights lost and angles missed. The deliverable here is triage, not thunder. Which knob to turn first, how far it should move the cone, and what it will cost to learn that promptly. Phase A opens under uneven skies. The confirmation nights are thin, the target is near the detection floor, and the reference catalogs differ between surveys. Centroids are carved out of a few stubborn electrons where rounding errors pretend to be intent. The initial orbit fit clears the basic checks, yet the residuals are not white. They bend with our angle as if the atmosphere were smuggling in a private correction. The pattern is mild, repeatable, and dangerous in a short arc, because any structure that survives one night is amplified into physics by the next. The second pass strips obvious outliers, switches catalogs, and reweights frames by inverse variance. The line tightens and then sags somewhere else. Residuals plotted against air mass show a slow gradient that cadence alone cannot hide. The short arc magnifies personality. Frames taken near twilight lean one way, frames near zenith lean another, and the orbit splits the difference with false confidence. What looked like random scatter acquires posture. The fix is not a miracle, but a method. Track environment metadata as carefully as star positions. Phase B adds a new latitude and better seeing at the cost of a busier background. A light curve appears, shallow but coherent over hours, implying rotation or elongation that modulates the flux. That breathing matters because photometric weights influence centroids. When the object dims for half a period, the centroid slips toward noise and drags the fit a few milliarc seconds off the truth. The danger is subtle. A real shape signal mixed with a background that is negotiating its price in each frame. So the team isolates the problems. Photometry is put on rails, fixed apertures, vetted comparison stars, stable sky annuli, and nightly 0 points audited in daylight. The light curve persists, but its amplitude shrinks when the method hardens. That is the point. Not every flicker is shape, and not every shape belongs in dynamics. Some of it is the cost of estimating faint light through a field that refuses to sit still. The orbit fit now includes an explicit rotation term to avoid mistaking brightness breathing for orbital torque. Phase C is the first true synthesis. Observatories, cameras, filters, and hemispheres contribute under a shared header. Distortion solutions are refreshed. Color terms are checked against the object's spectrum. Timestamps are reconciled to avoid the tiny poison of rounding to the wrong second. A blind cross-reduction is staged. Identical frames move through independent pipelines under labels that hide their origin. The goal is not a winner. It is an audit trail that survives scrutiny and shows which quirks travel with tools, not with the sky. The result is sobering. Pipelines largely agree on the mean, but they diverge on curvature in the residuals through the night. One pipeline prefers early evening, another prefers near zenith, a third mellows at high air mass after aggressive color correction. The signature follows the method, not the coordinates. That is an anomaly of its own evidence that persistent systematics live in the reductions. Any non-gravitational story must first outlive the pipelines. The team freezes versions, publishes notebooks, and reruns fits with parameters logged, not remembered. Phase D allows physics back in the room. A weak non-gravitational term standing in for thermal recoil or faint volatile loss is added. On paper, the fit improves, but only by a sliver and only for some nights. Extend the arc with cleaner geometry and the advantage fades. Restore a humid run and it reappears. That is not a detection. It is fragility. The team turns to penalties and knives. Simpler models are preferred unless the data insist. Information criteria are computed. Jackknife strategies drop one night, one station, one filter at a time. The weak term survives some knives, dies on others. Infrared enters as leverage rather than spectacle. The object is faint in heat. The zodiacal floor and phase angle push the background up. Even so, upper limits matter. A non-detection sets a ceiling on thermal flux, which, combined with reflected light, pins plausible size and albedo ranges. Within those ranges, A thermal recoil term can be consistent or not. The conclusion is narrow but useful. The surface is unlikely to be large and hot under these angles. Any recoil must be modest if present at all. Numbers, not adjectives, draw the box. Meanwhile, the anomaly stack becomes a map of nudges. Residuals tilt with air mass. Centroids scatter inflates in crowded fields and tracks star density more than sky position. Moon angle adds a soft bias that is small per frame but cumulative across a run. The light curve phase correlates weakly with centroid drift when signal to noise dips. None of these nudges is heroic. Together, they persuade the fit to wander. The remedy is to measure the nudges explicitly rather than wish them smooth. Weather and background stop being folklore and join the model as covariates. They test the sky itself. All sky cameras reveal thin cirrus on nights that previously rode high in the fit. Background levels creep through those hours with a slope that matches the residuals. Downweighting those frames removes the need for exotic forces and tightens the orbit a notch. Progress, then stall. One layer of the stack is shaved off. The cone still opens faster than a clean narrative would like. The lesson repeats. Geometry rules and goodwill cannot purchase signal. The only honest currency is cadence under kinder angles. Another pass targets the reference frame. A newer catalog shifts solutions by hairs that become continents downstream. Chromatic differences between the object and reference stars are modeled. Distortion maps are updated and tested against globular cluster fields. The gains are modest and real. Near zenith, the curve straightens. Near the horizon, it sags the physics of air, not of space. The fit respects this by letting air mass speak in the weights. Transparency about limits becomes part of the deliverable. Cadence gets redesigned because cadence is leverage. The team schedules a deliberately staggered run, pre-dawn, post-dusk, and a spread of hour angles to fracture hidden correlations. Cross-hemisphere redundancy ensures that local weather cannot veto the sequence. The new data stiffen the fit. Structured residuals flatten in two places and rise in a third. The rise identifies a persistent tool mark at one station. Reprocessing those frames, new flats, corrected headers, revised cosmic ray rejection, knocks the bump down to size. By now, the audience has learned the method. No miracles, only audits and geometry. The anomaly stack is a collage of almost testable, each test priced in nights. The language shifts from certainty to measurement of uncertainty. The orbit is real. The error bars are earned. The team stops asking whether the object is dramatic and starts asking which variable moved next buys the largest shrink in the cone per hour of sky. A provisional picture coalesces. There is no convincing plume, no decisive shove. The evidence favors a chorus of small effects, rotation that modulates flux, backgrounds that haggle with centroids, catalogs that age, optics with personalities, and, at most, a shy, non-gravitational term that refuses to stand alone when the weather is allowed to speak. The model honors parsimony and keeps the weak term on probation. Infrared ceilings, disciplined photometry, and geometry-aware cadence narrow the space of stories without pretending to close it. The sequence ends with a ledger, not a flourish. On one side, the errors with names, timestamps, and air mass. On the other, campaigns that can evict them, longer arc across both hemispheres, a shared reduction standard with public notebooks, rotation, aware orbit fitting, a targeted IR attempt if background forecasts cooperate. Each action lists an expected uncertainty, reduction, a relative cost, and a time to effect. The anomaly stack has told them where to spend, and the window ahead will test whether the bill was wise. Silence enters as a measured blank, not a verdict. Frames that should have shown a thin plume return only grain. Infrared logs climb to a careful ceiling and stop. Radar says nothing at all, pinned by distance and geometry. The absence has edges. It draws a contour around size, albedo, temperature, and any steady push that would have broken through the floor. Quiet here is a ruler with no numbers, yet a fixed length. Upper limits become grammar. If heat is unseen above a published threshold, the body must be smaller and reflective or larger and cold. If no dust is resolved, then any outgassing sits below the flux that would have lifted the wings. Silence prunes stories. It narrows priors and cuts branches where a tail, a glow, or a spike should have lived. The fit keeps fewer, sharper paths to test next. Statistics makes quiet heavy. A non-detection at a known depth can equal several faint detections with ragged errors. In Bayesian hands, it tightens posteriors. In frequentist form, it lands as a constraint in the objective. Either way, the cone shrinks, honestly, not dramatically. The model stops wandering into deserts the sky has already refused. Progress is a smaller map, not a louder claim. Silence also audits the tools. When backgrounds swell and no source appears, pipelines confess their appetites. How bright must a signal be before admission? How stable must flats remain before ghosts stop imitating physics? Detection curves, traced in daylight, fence ambition. They keep human eyes from sketching meaning into noise and make thresholds part of the method, not folklore. There is a sober comfort in this. The world does not applaud every query. Sometimes it gives a precise blank. That blank says, any engine is a whisper. Any dust sits under tonight's floor. Any thermal glow is modest at these angles. It points toward darker sky, cleaner bands, longer stairs, and timing that flatters phase rather than fights it. The next window is not guesswork. It is designed. So worse earns a second translation. Certainty now costs more. Silence itemizes the bill. To move the ceiling or the floor, someone must pay hours on glass, wavelength where the background relents, calibration that survives scrutiny. The ledger passes forward, where provisional answers meet prices, and a single quiet night can be counted in kilometers spared by the orbit. Provisional answers arrive plain, without fanfare, no plume, no decisive shove, nothing that compels a rewrite of gravity. What emerges is cumulative friction, short and skewed arcs, punitive geometry, rotation that modulates flux, backgrounds that haggle with centroids, and a tentative non-gravitational term that survives on the margin. Worse here means compounded difficulty, not cinematic peril, and the remedy is methodical rather than mythic. He frames the interim verdict as steps, each tied to a measurable exit. First, cadence as medicine. Extend the arc with geometry, aware nights, and cross-hemisphere redundancy to break hidden correlations. Second, photometry on rails. Fixed apertures, vetted comparison stars, nightly zero-point audits, and rotation terms honored in the fit. Third, astrometry on a stricter diet. Updated catalogs, color corrections, distortion maps, and public cross reductions. Every step draws a cost. Ground time is billed in nights and weather risk. Space assets are billed in proposals, queues, and patience. A single high-quality sequence pre-dawn plus post-dusk across 3 windows consumes multiple teams and a week of choreography. The dividend is leverage. Residuals flatten, structure fades, and the cone narrows by measured inches rather than leaps. It is slow progress that stays put. Infrared time is the big ticket. Even a clean non-detection moves the ceiling on size and thermal inertia, but the zodiacal floor and phase geometry demand long integrations. Securing that block displaces other science. The trade is blunt: invest now while the arc is still warm, or pay more later when the target grows fainter and the geometry less forgiving. Opportunity cost is a shadow currency that never leaves the ledger. Pipelines are cheaper to improve than photons are to collect. Standardizing reductions across observatories, shared headers, version distortion solutions, agreed sigma clipping, and blind cross-checks produces systematic gains at modest expense. The true cost is cultural. Methods exposed in daylight, notebooks that reproduce, and egos yielded to common baselines. Reproducibility is an instrument in its own right. He drafts a compact ledger to keep decisions falsifiable. For each action, a triad: expected uncertainty, reduction, relative cost, and time to effect. Longer arc, medium cost, medium time, high gain when angles cooperate. Stricter photometry, low cost, short time, medium gain that compounds. IR window, high cost, medium time, medium to high gain if detected, low but still useful if not. Numbers replace adjectives. The shy non-gravitational term is treated as a witness under oath. Penalized fits remain the referee. If the term persists through jackknife nights, catalog swaps, and pipeline diversity, it earns a deeper inquiry. If it fades the moment, weather covariates and background models are honored, it is a ghost of the sky. Either outcome reduces guesswork for the next mission and narrows the parameter playground. Mission design enters as a practical thought experiment with invoices attached. An intercept concept trades delta V against knowledge. Launch early and burn more to meet a hostile geometry, or wait for a friendlier angle at the risk of losing cooperation. Sensor choices mirror the hypotheses. Thermal instruments if recoil is plausible, wide field photometry if rotation and shape dominate the noise budget. Governance has a price rarely itemized. Shared calendars, rapid data releases, and a living methods registry collapse latency between exposure and revision. The fee is coordination overhead and the discomfort of fast peer review. The payoff is a community orbit solution that behaves like a single instrument instead of a choir of unaligned voices. Latency shrinks, arabos follow, communication claims a line of its own. Worse than thought must be translated without inflation. He chooses ratios over rhetoric. The cone widened by this fraction under those assumptions, then tightened by that fraction after cadence and re-reduction. Clarity costs scripting time, graphics, and captions, but it buys trust that survives the next update. Public patience is conserved when numbers lead. By the end of this ledger, the spreadsheet outvotes the headline. The near-term package is concrete. 3 geometry, aware nights across both hemispheres, a standardized re-reduction with the newest catalog, rotation, aware photometry on a fixed rail, and a targeted IR attempt if background forecasts cooperate. Each line has a reason, a price, and a measurable exit. The bill is not the villain, it is the method. The next window slides in without ceremony. It arrives as kinder angles. Solar elongation eases, phase softens, and a darker band crosses the field. This is leverage territory. He marks 3 nights per hemisphere, staggered across hour angles, so geometry stops punishing and starts cooperating. The plan is not heroic. It is scheduled, disciplined, and built to turn uncertainty into a measurable decline. The first decisive test is high-precision photometry on rails. Fixed apertures, unwavering comparison stars, and a light curve solved with rotation explicit, not implied. If the orbit tightens when brightness breathing is honored, then shape and spin were the hidden culprits behind centroid drift. If tightening does not appear, the case for an external nudge grows only by the fraction the curve refuses to explain. The second test is a carefully timed infrared push. Background forecasts, zodiacal models, and phase geometry decide when the heat is most revealing. Even silence has teeth. A deep non-detection lifts a ceiling on thermal flux which, paired with reflected light, boxes size and albedo. Inside that box, a thermal recoil term is either numerically plausible or politely retired. The third test is administrative and surgical at once. A full re-reduction against the newest reference with color terms, distortion maps, and timestamps audited in daylight. Identical frames run through independent pipelines under blind labels. Agreement that follows the sky rather than the software is the litmus. Disagreement that tracks a method is a repair order, not a mystery. A fourth test lets weather join the mathematics. Air mass, sky brightness, moon geometry, and seeing are treated as covariates instead of folklore. If residuals relax when the atmosphere is allowed to speak, then physics calms by subtraction. If they do not, what remains is the narrow place where new forces, however modest, must either step forward or step aside. Beyond the checklist sits a reflection that refuses drama. Worse than thought was a budget statement in Orbital grammar. Too few nights, at unfriendly angles, with tools that needed to agree before the sky could. Each constraint earned by silence, each bias named in public, is a kilometer saved downstream. Certainty is never free, but it can be invoiced, defended, and delivered. He closes with a promise of method. Measure what truly moves the fit, ignore what flatters the story, and report numbers in daylight. If the cone shrinks by a modest fraction, that is science working. If it does not, that is science too, because it tells the next mission what to build. The window opens briefly. The plan is ready to spend it well and to account for every gain.